I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. And thanks to NASEO for having me today. And thanks all of you for coming and being interested in this legislation. As Ed noted, I have been working with Jeff Genzer of NASEO on this legislation since I think, it's the great grandchild of bills that we were working on in the early 2000s. So, but the Hope for Homes bill that has been in this semi in this form since Hope was developed right at the start of the pandemic. So, since shortly after the pandemic started, this new version of Hope for Homes, but Homes has been around for about a decade. So in some form or fashion, it's changed over time. For what I'm planning to talk about, and then I do want to find out lots of questions and get your insights and your thoughts on these issues, is that give you a quick status on where Hope for Homes is. Ed hinted to that. And then we're going to do a deep dive, a drill down into the budget reconciliation, what's in there, what from the underlying bill has been incorporated in, and implementation, and how that might look, and how, frankly, the states would like to see it to look. And that's a key thing that I'd like to learn. The bipartisan infrastructure package, as you know, passed late on Friday. Jeff Genzer is going to tell you all about this on the first, as Ed said. But there is the Insulate bill, which is in there. That was Senator Manchin's bill, which is $250 million, as well as a $40 million competitive grant, which is part of the Insulate, and then the $3.5 billion for weatherization assistance programs. I want to note that both of those programs are complementary to Hope for Homes. They were certainly Insulate was developed at the same time, or in unison. We worked really closely with Manchin's office to make sure that it was complementary to Homes. So the idea is certainly that these would all work very closely together. The budget reconciliation was 3.5 trillion and is now 1.75 trillion. That's the budget reconciliation that is it says resolution there. The reconciliation legislation is 3.75 trillion in the House, and the key element to that is it did change the size of Hope for Homes. It went from being 9.5 billion to 6.25 billion. It's still with a B, and that's still a lot of money. So and it's over 10 years. So those are all things that we're really happy to see. A lot of the Senate legislation was pre-conference with the House. That's why we saw a number of pieces drop out of it, particularly things like weatherization, EECBG, because they were in the infrastructure bill, didn't get another showing in the reconciliation bill, but or the CEPP, which I'm sure you've all heard about, that those all fell out because of those pre-conferencing discussions. But there are still a lot of changes that are happening. I do not anticipate that the Hope for Homes, as it currently appears in the House legislation, is going to be the same as how it will appear from the Senate side. But I do expect it to be in both bills. As you know, the appropriations has a continuing resolution until December 3rd. And then, of course, we have the debt limit looming over us, which could, the Treasury is predicted to sort of run out of their borrowing power at the end of the year without addressing that. So these are other big issues apart from the NDAA, which now has scheduled floor time. So there's a lot of things between us and the finish line of budget reconciliation. But, this is the big picture. And then I'm going to start drilling down into what the details are. So budget reconciliation, some details here. So the House reconciliation package, as I noted, is now 6.25 billion through 2031 for Hope for Homes. This is the October 28th version. There was a earlier version, as I noted, that had 9.5 billion. That means it's 360 million for the HOPE program, which is the online performance-based energy efficiency. Just to note, it's not only online. It is now, unlike when it was originally introduced at the start of the pandemic, being only online, is online or in person. That said, there's been a lot of training programs that have gone online. When this was first envisioned at the beginning of the pandemic to help contractors who were not able to work inside the home, but give them something to do to, or others who are transitioning in the workforce, to give them opportunities to do online training. This, now there's a lot of online training opportunities, but then there's also their in-person test outs were always expected. And so there will be opportunities for both online and in person in Hope. But I actually have learned more about training the past 2 years than I knew of online training. And there are these sort of, one might call them training deserts, where there really aren't a lot of training facilities in large parts of the country. And so our hope is that online training is actually going to help with those job transitions and help states that have, workers who want to do work at night in their job transition or in their personal continuing education, or who are in a part of the country that don't have access to training facilities, be able to do most of the work in the online training, and then perhaps travel to a testing center just for some of the in-person validation tests. So that is, that's kind of some of the visions for the HOPE program. The HOMES program is the rebates that are the $5.89 billion. Those are the rebates. It's a 360 plus 5.89 is what makes the 6.25. The HOMES rebates they're out of the underlying legislation. I put that here for you for reference. That's a 1768 and 3456. Those are the underlying bills that all of this was based on. But of course, that 75-page bill is not going to be able to be incorporated into the reconciliation package, because reconciliation language requires that it have a budgetary hook. And a lot of it is authorizing language. And that is where really the rubber meets the road here, because there's going to need to be a lot of guidelines and a lot of how this money is transferred, what are the parameters for developing these programs that will need to be determined by DOE, and hopefully with the important input from the states, so that the states can get these programs and implement these programs. All of that are some of the pieces that I'd love to start working with you guys on, so that we can figure out, and tell DOE what we think is the best idea, as well as work with DOE on those issues, so that hopefully this can move relatively quickly once the bill passes. There was in the underlying bill, if you're familiar with it, a prescriptive approach. It was what was called partial performance, because it required efficiency and weatherization prior to HVAC, but it was that piece from that standalone bill is not included. In fact, it was pretty much eliminated in order to put in place the ZEHA, the Zero Emissions Homes Act, which was also a prescriptive approach and isn't a prescriptive approach. So Hope for Homes is paired with a high efficiency electric homes rebate program. This is essentially is the Zero Emissions Homes Act, but just again in a smaller bite-sized piece for reconciliation. And it's a funding per piece per technology. Excuse me. So to provide that, one of the elements, Hope for Homes and ZEHA were at one point kind of going neck and neck for the same pot of money, and instead we kind of got married together. And so that's why they're equal portions, 6.25, 6.25, and one is really the more prescriptive approach, which is all electric, and one is the performance-based approach, which is the Homes Act with the training of Hope. So the Senate text hasn't been yet to be released, but our expectation is that both will be in there. I just walked you through a little bit of Hope and how that's going to work. And again, this is for the, it was always designed to be big tent. So the underlying bill talks about all sorts of energy efficiency retrofits and auditing and all sorts of things that could be done in the training. And I think a lot of that can and should be included. But I anticipate that budget reconciliation in the Senate may simply say, look, you need to put together a training program to help people get trained to do the rebates. So that may get more tied between the two. That's something that we'll be looking for and looking at. So what are the homes rebates? So 85% of the funds must be used for the upgrades. So 85% of the 5.89, that 15% is for administrative costs, state administrative costs. And of all of the funds, there's supposed to be at least 3 buckets. According to the House bill, this may not translate to the Senate, but that's at least 25% of the funds to do single family upgrades, 25% for multifamily upgrades, and 25% for moderate income. And moderate income is 80% of the area median income. So that is, and the intention of that moderate income, and that how the underlying bill was written, is that moderate income families are after weatherization, because if you can get weatherization, you should do weatherization. We know that there's also going to be expansion of technologies and things like that, thanks to these new funds. So weatherization is 100% and should be the focus for low-income families. But if they don't qualify for weatherization, but significant upgrades to the home are still a challenge, which is the case for many families across the country, that lower income, moderate income families can qualify. And it's based on the area median income, recognizing that family in New York or California or Kentucky or Kansas, there's just different area median incomes, and we want to take that into account. So there are these 3 buckets, and again, it's a no less than 25%, meaning like 75 that covers 75% of the funds, but another 25% I think is really at the state's discretion. So the way it's designed is that $2,000 for a 20% improvement in a single or multifamily unit. There are differences, and certainly single and multifamily are very different. And there's modeled savings, and $4,000 for a retrofit that achieves at least a 35% modeled savings. So again, this is the modeled approach where you're modeling the performance savings based on the measures you're going to put in. But then if you do a pay per kilowatt hour, or essentially pay for performance approach, where you have an aggregator and you're aggregating homes and home energy savings, then that can be based on a kilowatt hour equivalent saved. So basically you establish what how much per kilowatt hour, based on an average home saving 20% of its energy use. If that equals $2,000 in your state, that kind of sets up what the average kilowatt hour equivalent is. And then for the pay for performance approach, it starts at 15%. So for a portfolio, again, we're expecting this to be aggregators and a portfolio approach, because you really need a portfolio approach to actually be able to do the kilowatt hour equivalent savings. So that's that in a nutshell, related to how the homes rebates are intended to work. And then these are doubled. The rebates are doubled if it is for moderate income families. So again, that's $4,000 for a 20% improvement, or $8,000 for a 35% improvement. Now, or $4,000 for 20% reduction per kilowatt hour savings. So these are, and this is for the 80% median area and income, which is a significant portion of the country. Now, that 80% number has shifted in different places over the course of drafts of budget reconciliation, whether it's 80%, 100%, and so, I'd watch that number. I certainly am. but I think 80% is what's in the House bill, and I think that is where it looks like it is going. So I just want to start then moving towards implementation. So again, 15% of the funds can be used for administration by the state energy offices. DOE would need to develop a number of guidelines, and then the SEOs would need to put together their program. The SEOs would, so DOE says these are the guidelines for doing this program, and the SEOs say, okay, and here's how I'm going to do it. It was always intended to have a fair amount of flexibility for the states, recognizing that the states have different contractor workforces, different energy policies overlying their goals, and different levels of maturity of their current programs. Some states have been doing energy efficiency programs for decades. Others are more new to those programs. Some have real preferences for different kinds of programs. So hopefully there is enough flexibility to ensure that states are comfortable, but also enough consistency so there's some comparability across states, and ability for do lessons learned, and ability to provide appropriate technical assistance. So here's a list here. I don't want to just go through each and every one of these right here, though. Maddie, I don't know if I think it's after we're going to be kind of asking the states as to what their specific thoughts are on these, but the states are going to have to figure out, the states and DOE is going to have to say how the states are going to qualify to submit their proposals. There's going to need to be forms for homeowners, contractors, or aggregators, how they're going to receive the funds. There are specific things that are in the bill, including, approved open source, advanced measurement verification software. Certain softwares types are written into legislation. We want to make sure that the right, what are the softwares and how do you have access? Test out procedures, as well as the procedures for the work performed, and establishing data sharing policies. In the underlying bill, there's a very specific requirement to DOE to establish data sharing best practices for states to use. It's only kind of touched on in the budget reconciliation language. So it'll be really interesting to see where the states, how the states feel about that, and how DOE feels about that, and certainly want to incorporate appropriate privacy concerns. For modeled and measured performance rebates, so for both of those, the states are going to have to figure out how homeowners transfer the right to claim the rebate to a contractor or an aggregator. In many cases, one would expect that the contractor or aggregator would be the ones to get the actual rebate, so they can transfer it more quickly to the homeowner at time of sale or a time of contract, and establishing the requirements for different entities to serve as aggregators. There's lots of aggregators that are currently in the marketplace, but what are which ones are most appropriate for these programs? And there may be a lot of potentially program implementers that want to serve as aggregators in this, in this kind of vision. So we want to make sure that happens. And also quality monitoring procedures, and one of the things we want to make sure is that we are encompassing what are the rules of the road without establishing so many rules of the road that nobody wants to do this. So that's the other thing, right? Now I want to talk a little bit about the high efficiency electric home rebate program, because this program is really it has really been married to Hope for Homes to some degree. And I think it has a real opportunity for states who are really focused on decarbonization to have access to significant funds. So in the House bill, it says that the secretary shall establish within the department. Now that is that means that the secretary is going to do it. It's going to be run from the federal government. The federal government's going to run the rebate program. Now, the issue with that is it is unlikely to pass the Byrd rule by the parliamentarian. Now, I think they're going to try it, but the parliamentarian has not yet ruled on this language, so we don't know whether or not it's going to pass. I think state energy offices should be prepared that they may be the ones issuing these rebates. $6.25 billion again for these different measures, and it's a capped at $10,000, though I think it goes up to $14,000 for low income families, and has a whole lot of different electric systems that can be or non-electric systems that can be replaced with electric systems. Again, the Senate has not yet released their bill, but we do expect it to be included. Here are some key high-level points for electrification rebates to start getting your head around them. So there's for hot water, heat pump hot water is $1,250, heat pump HVAC $3,000, and Energy Star cold climate is $4,000. And again, there's a difference between the 27.5 BTU and less and more, because that's basically looking at mini splits. So we do see there is a difference between those two, and there's more for cold climate. We want to make sure that some of you may only want to see cold climate heat pumps qualify in your region, and that's something to be thinking about. And then the electric load and service center panels. We all know that if we're going to be putting in these new electric systems, a lot of times the whole panels need to be upgraded, and that's a barrier to implementation of electrification. So that's why that $3,000 is there. And part of the deal in the marriage with Hope for Homes is that when we eliminated the prescriptive approach for in homes, they put into which was not in the original ZHA, an $800 for insulation and air sealing. So there are still funds to do some weatherization when you're installing these heat pumps. It's not required like it was in partial performance, but there is in fact an additional, I think it's like an additional $250 $250 if it's done within 6 months. And then the maximum rebate again is $10,000 unless they're LMI, in which it's $14,000 up to 100% of the cost. It's up to 50% of the total cost, which is 50% of the total cost for market rate is the same as Hope for Homes. Hope for Homes again has moderate income families and 80%. Hope for Homes does not address low income families because that was the weatherization. That is going to be one of the places where these two bills don't meet exactly, and it would be something for the states to provide input on. There's language on certified contractors, and it also says that it can be new construction, whereas Hope for Homes is very focused on existing buildings. A last point before we start kind of getting into some more meat of the conversation is that Hope for Homes there are labor requirements in both bills. In Hope for Homes, there's single family has no labor requirements outside what is placed by the states. There's no Davis-Bacon requirement, but multifamily does have Davis-Bacon labor practicing requirements included. And that is something that we worked a long time working with the labor community to ensure a comfort level between those two. For electrification rebates, it's $250 to $500 for companies that have certain labor practices. So it's more of an incentive program rather than a requirement under electrification. Again, this is something that the states may have to figure out a marriage on, and may have inputs themselves from their own, what the state's procedures currently are. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you. Glad I'm here, and I'm looking forward to having the discussion.
All right, thank you, Kara. So I want to encourage folks to either put your questions in the chat box, or you can, if you click on the reactions button, you can raise your hand if you want to ask your question. I'll also remind everyone that we will shift over to a states only meeting in just a bit. So if you want to save your question for that time, just keep that in mind. So with that, we do have one question already from Lloyd Cass. Does the $3,000 for the electric load and service panel include wiring updates throughout the home?
It specifically talks about the panel, but I think these are one of the things that the definition could be that could be modified by the Department of Energy, very likely on that front. Because it's very focused on the panel, but I think there's opportunities that we could look at.
So I'm gonna freelance here since I don't see any other questions coming in. So, you were talking about the underlying bill having about 75 pages, but because of the process of putting this in the reconciliation bill, a lot of that has to be stripped out. So that leaves the Department of Energy in with the task of designing and implementing the program, right?
Yes, there are parameters in the bill. A fair amount actually in the House budget reconciliation version. I'm anticipating that some of those though are going to fall out thanks to the Byrd rule, and because Senator Manchin may have his own ideas. So
right.
But yes, there are going to be a lot of elements that DOE is going to have to determine, and that's really where I think it's important that we learn from NASEO what the states are comfortable with, so that because my hope is that when the guidelines come out, by the time the guidelines do come out, the states already know what they want to do and are able to, in short order, follow with here's what we'd like to do to meet these program guidelines.
Right, and so that was the first. That's the reason why we want to hold this call and convene this group of folks, is to sort of start to get that input from our state energy offices, our affiliates as well. Obviously, we are the Association of State Energy Offices, so that the state energy office opinion really matters to us, and we want to help convey that to DOE. Our ability to shape their program, there may be limits to what we can do, but we can certainly provide our input, and getting this process started is step one. I also expect that we'll convene a working group, a small working group, and we had a total of about 40 folks register for this webinar. So I think there's going to be more interest than we may see right on this call at this moment. I do see a comment from David Heslom. Yeah. So I'll read that for everybody. It's great to hear that the homes rebates are complementary to the HEEHRP rebates. Will both of these be additive to the potential tax credits as well? And to rephrase, could a single project qualify for homes, HEEHRP, and a federal tax credit? And David, you can unmute and clarify that if you want.
I think I understand it. Could you get a homes rebate, an electrification rebate, and a 25C tax credit? Which is a good question. I think the answer is very likely yes. So as of right now, there's no double dipping language in 25C. And the only issue is to whether or not the electrification rebates are, so electrification rebates, if they remain for market rate, there's been discussions as to how much will stay for market rate versus for more moderate income families or low income families. If they stay for market rate, then I think that's correct. I think that the 25C tax credits are are much more useful to more market rate upper income families because of tax liability. And many of the lower income families don't have tax liability or don't fill out a form to have those deductions. So that's why, I think homes and 25C will pair best than the electrification rebates, if the electrification rebates get held to only lower and market rate lower and moderate income families. But yes, right now, the way the budget reconciliation is as it currently is in the House, then if you were to do a 20% improvement of your home and got you're a market rate and you're 20% improvement of your home, and you did that by installing a high efficiency heat pump, and then you also, and that got you a 20% savings, and that high efficiency heat pump got a 25C tax credit, which it should. under current, the current bill, then you could get a $2,000 from homes, $3,000 from the electrification rebate, and then a up to 30% off with a cap of $1,200 for the project from 25C. But that one would presume only on what you spent outside of that rebate, I would presume. But we would need to see what the rules that would come out of the IRS on that. But yeah, there's a real potential of getting over $5,000 for the installation of a heat pump. Which,
yeah.
but it would be capped. It would be capped at 50% of the overall project, because that we're talking market rate. So it's still capped at 50%.
And this would also most likely be the case for the 45L tax credit that goes for new construction as well, since with the electrification rebates,
Yes.
not the homes rebates.
Yeah, so electrification rebates are allowable for new homes. And it's a little vague in the bill as to how that would play. But yes, 45L that would apply, and in fact you'll see that the tax credits tend to be more favorable for electrification actually in the House legislation than they were in current existing law from the 2005 energy bill. So I do think that there's a real opportunity for them to be used together, unless the rebates end up being more for the lower income families that don't have tax liability. So that would be that issue.
It's just an important consideration for state programs as they work with stakeholders, and the home builders being a important stakeholder in every state when it comes to housing programs. So
right, and again, homes that's a good point, David. And homes, of course, is an existing homes program, but of course, a lot of home builders are also existing home builders. So
right, exactly.
Certainly, whenever there's a recession, new home builders are becoming existing home builders.
This might rejuvenate some of the remodeling councils that state home builder associations have.
Yes, and NAHB is a supporter of the Hope for Homes legislation. Both NAHB and ACA and LIUNA were all supportive of the legislation, as was a number of the, we had a very diverse group of supporters of Hope for Homes.
Great, and they're supporting the electrification.
I do not believe so. They don't. Okay. The electrification. Now, ZIA has a relatively new bill. To be fair, ZIA is a relatively new piece of legislation. So, and I mean, it was introduced in the late spring last year or early summer. So, right around the time of the bill actually being the infrastructure bill being moved was right around the time that it was even introduced. So I think that they may not have had as much. They didn't have as much time to pull it together and pull all those stakeholders. But there's been a lot of supporters, and it's strongly supported by the environmental community. And in fact, that's where the overlap, I think, between Hope for Homes and ZIA, in terms of the overlap of supporters of the two, there's a strong support from the environmental community for both of them. NRDC and Sierra Club and and ACEEE and the Alliance to Save Energy and USGBC. So looks like Lloyd has a question.
Yeah, hi, Kara. My question is just one more question. I know I always have a lot for you, but you talked about the stacking of the Hope for Homes and zero energy homes. Is it going to be up to the states and their regulatory commission partners to determine how to blend and or not blend ratepayer funded rebates with these programs?
So the underlying bill says a lot about that. And I keep saying this, I keep saying the underlying bill, and that's because that's where the guidance is. So the underlying bill has a lot to say about that and requires there to be a coordination, but I do not think that those types of requirements pass the bird rule. So I would anticipate that state energy offices would want to be sure that there's some understanding between the two programs, because otherwise we'll have confusion in the marketplace. So I would expect there to be some sort of, here's what the rebates are, here's what the ratepayer rebates are, here's what the Hope for Homes or electrification funded rebates are. Now, electrification, again, currently is set to be a federal rebate. So the states would not have any real say over it, except to hopefully provide some sort of market guidance as to how, contractors or aggregators might want to work between those. But, as I noted, I do think that there's going to be a need for the states to potentially pick up and do those rebates too. So if it doesn't pass the bird rule. I'm not sure, I think I answered your question. Yes, it's going to be, up to the states to make that determination.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All good questions?
Not seeing anything in the chat. Does anyone want to jump in with questions? If we don't get any questions, I'm thinking maybe we'll switch over to states only early. So.
In case people are holding their questions.
All right, so I'm gonna give folks a 10-second warning. If you are an affiliate member and you want to ask a question, now's the time. All right. Oh, I got a hand up. David Haslam.
All right, one last question on I've been trying to read the tea leaves, Kara, on the aggregator description.
Yes.
And I noticed there's a lot of different entities described, that could potentially be an aggregator.
Yes.
So do you foresee that narrowing down at all? As this gets towards the finish line, or is it's going to stay this? Because it's quite wide right now. Like who could potentially be an aggregator?
And that was by design. One thing to note, and I think this is an important point actually, that kind of comes up when I was talking about the two different visions of Hope for Homes and ZEHA, is that Hope for Homes was written as with the intent of a 60 vote bill, right? So that when we were working on it, we were looking at 60 votes. Whereas when ZEHA was being put together, there was always the intent at budget reconciliation. So I think that there is a different vision, so so something to think about when you're looking at how did these guys get together, and it's kind of an odd pairing to some degree. And I think that's some of the odd pairing. That's where some of it comes out. So just from a historical perspective, that might kind of help. But then the other thing is that that we are going to, when it comes to the aggregators, this is kind of a new idea. I mean, yes, aggregators have been around forever, and they've been doing all sorts of wonderful things in the renewable energy market, and they've been really doing really cool things in California. But this is sort of a new vision for aggregator, and a lot of money at it. And so I think the intent, I know my intent and my advocacy there was not to shut people out yet when it's a new idea, and there's a lot of folks who I'm not even sure who wants to be an aggregator. Honestly, I could list a bunch of people who might want to be aggregators. Some of them may be on this call, but I don't really know if they actually do when they actually see the rules. And I'm not sure what those rules actually need to be. The only ones who are currently, I think, most qualified are going to be utilities, because they have the data. And and originally they weren't even, if you look at earlier versions of homes, utilities were not allowed to be aggregators. That was something that's actually happened in Hope for Homes, in part because we wanted this to be able to start quickly and not just take a lot of time. And who has the data right now and could do it tomorrow is, the utilities, but, or people who are currently working with them. But it was, the idea, David, was a big tent. I don't know. I think actually it's going to be very self-selective of people who are going to decide whether they want to do it or not, because I think it's not going to be super easy. But
yeah, depending on the qualifications from the feds
Yes.
and any additional qualifications that states may layer on
Yes.
top of that. One follow-up with the electrification or ZIHA, if that went to the states, would you foresee that having that same aggregator language be attached to that component if it switched to a state?
I would
Disbursement?
hope that, I would hope that an aggregator that worked in Hope for Homes could also work with the electrification rebate. One of the things that one of my goals as somebody who's been, fighting for this type of legislation, I mean, we're really talking about more money for home performance and residential performance-based energy efficiency than we've ever seen. I would really like to see it be as simple as possible. It's a complex thing that we're going to try to make as simple as possible. And that means, and that's really the whole purpose of an aggregator, is to make it simple. And maybe not for the aggregator, but for the people who are working on it, to make it simple. And that would mean hopefully that they could internalize any of that complication that of marrying those two credits together, so that the contractors who are offering it, the homeowners who are deciding what to do with their part of that, of their skin in the game, how they're going to work in it, that they're able to see a relatively simple program. I don't kid myself that it's going to be simple, but I think that hopefully once brilliant minds come together and decide what it is, there will be aggregators who will step up to the plate with ideas for making it happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the keeping it simple. I just had lunch with, biggest contractor that used to do this work in the Northwest. And they were like, oh, keep it simple. This has got to be simple, because you're going to be competing for labor with every other contracting entity, right? He's like, the competition just to get anyone to do anything right now is very, very fierce. And so the model that contractors see really needs to be simple. So I love hearing what you're saying, that your concept is that the aggregator model could make it simpler for contractors and homeowners.
That's the hope for the aggregator piece. And I'm hopeful that that's how it works out. But, and I feel like the underlying bill's intent was that, but again, that's why we have to, that's why I'm working with Ed and Maddie to try and find ways of making sure we know what the states feel like they can do or want to do prior to, we don't want rules that come out that nobody wants to work with. The other thing is, let's not forget hope. There's a training program. Not having workers in the workforce to do the work is right up there with the fact that it's hard to even find a heat pump, because they're all probably sitting in a port somewhere right now. So the workers part, I don't know what I can do about the ports. but I know Biden's in Baltimore this afternoon talking about ports. What we really do need to do is make certain that the training is there, so that workers who are in transition have that opportunity to get that training and can join this workforce. We need training that is in the trades, that, we need trades to be seen as, not just handymen. These are really technical things. Installing HVAC units these are not your grandfather's HVAC unit, literally. I mean, these are very complicated systems, and we need people who know how to do them, and they should get paid and trained to do it. So anyway, soapbox, sorry.
Yeah, no. Thank you. I mean, workforce training is going to be key, because there's a lot of people outside of the workforce right now.
Yes, we need to get them in.
Yes, this could help bring them into the workforce. So
yes,
that's great.
Get them in.
Thank you.
Sure. And there's actually, and in the underlying bill, there was a lot of work on diversity and equity and inclusion, and trying to ensure that we have a workforce that is not particularly diverse. And how do we bring more communities of color to the table? How do we do that outreach? And a lot of that is actually in the underlying bill, and I hope it gets included. I know there are a lot of states who are very committed to that as well. So hopefully that gets included in a lot of the rules to just help bring bigger tent. Any other questions? Not enough trades.
right.
Yes, we need more trade people. And there was, I was on a call earlier today with Senator Van Hollen and a bunch of Maryland contractors because just as an anecdote, part just a thank you for Hope for Homes. Most of the lobby days that we're doing these days are out with swing voters, but it's his bill, so I want to say thanks. But and the big thing that all the contractors were talking about is we need more apprenticeships. We need more people from high school, they're saying we need people to stop picking for your schools and come and make money in the trades. Like they want to hire them. So there's I think that there's this opportunity to really create a new pathway for people to get real well-paying jobs. So at least that's the hope, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I don't see any more affiliate questions out there. So I think we're gonna go ahead and switch over to states only. So if you're an affiliate member, please drop off at this
Bye,
point.
affiliates.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your good questions. I'm going to actually switch off the recording just in case that's a barrier for anyone. So do that now.